Hi, this is the first weekly summary for Econ 4. I'm going to try and summarise each week's major topic in about 5 minutes. So here we go. The key topic this week is economic growth, and if you look in the text at the bottom, you'll see the classic explanation of economic growth, which we usually measure in terms of percentage changes in real GDP. So it's an increase in the capacity of the economy to produce goods and services over a period of time. The graph's worth looking at because you can see the pre-recession trend, if it continued, would be up here. But once the recession kicked in due to the global financial crisis, there was a restructuring of the economy, putting it on a new trend for economic growth. So it's taken 6 years to return to the situation that the economy was in prior to the economic recession. Having a quick look at the theory and linking it back to your AS level of understanding, there are two types of economic growth that we're interested in. Short-term economic growth, which would move us from point A to point B, and longer run economic growth, where the productive capacity of the economy would expand from PPF 1 to PPF 2 out here. It's worth pausing the video just to have a think about this text in here before you move on. So taking an alternative view, we can see that over time most economies will experience an expansion or an increase in the trend rate of growth, but we get this periodic movement through the trade cycle. And if you were using this sort of analysis, you'd be talking about those last 6 years in this zone here, where initially, once the economy moved into that deep recession in 2008, we experienced this, which was the negative output gap. And as the economy is beginning to recover, we're experiencing a move towards the production possibility frontier for this particular economy. Looking at it from another perspective, if you take diagram A on the left-hand side, our classic sort of Keynesian approach to the economy, an increase in aggregate demand will increase both real GDP. There'll be some possible increase in the price level, but overall we're experiencing an increase in short-run economic growth. If we look at the alternative analysis in diagram B, over the long term, as the productive capacity of the economy expands, it allows an increase in real GDP towards the trend. So if I put my aggregate demand 1 and aggregate demand 2 on top of the diagram, you'll see that there's an expansion of the economy towards its production possibility frontier. And the closer that we get towards the long-run aggregate supply curve, the closer we are to full capacity. So that's what economic growth is and the diagrammatic representation of economic growth, but a key question will always be, what are the causes of long-term economic growth? And if you look at the factors on this particular slide, you'll see there's a link between increasing labour participation, increasing labour productivity, improving human capital, an investment in physical capital to improve the capital base of your economy, and then the creation of an enterprise culture or an enterprise economy. So those 5 factors all relate to the factors of production. The difficult one to assess and the difficult one to create is an environment of economic stability and sound macroeconomic policies, which would create the environment for business investment to thrive. But a combination of those factors would generally contribute to long-term economic growth. Another question that's often asked is to assess the advantages and disadvantages of economic growth. So the advantages, the positives up here, are the potential to improve living standards, and with that the possibility of reducing absolute poverty as overall national income rises. It allows governments to raise tax revenue without raising taxes, so growth generates more tax revenue. This can therefore fund public spending and also be used to correct negative externalities. So there are a number of key advantages in terms of economic growth. However, there are also a set of key disadvantages down here, because we do seem to have an obsession with trying to achieve economic growth. Well, the key ones I would really argue is that economic growth, in terms of its downsides, will often produce negative externalities in terms of depletion of non-renewables, often results in increased inequality. So we saw that in Unit 3. And a generalised question is, although societies may be bigger and may have greater levels of GDP, does that actually make them happier societies? So a final point to consider is, how does economic growth link to other topics, other macro topics? Well, growth is very closely linked to the whole unemployment debate. So we'll be seeing that in the next week or so. A related issue is how growth might have an impact on inflation, and we'll look at an argument to do with the Phillips curve in week 3 of this term. Links to other topics would include links to policy areas. So if you're trying to achieve growth, what are the best policies to pursue and achieve? And a final area of interest, certainly for an economy like the UK, is how economic growth has an impact on our trade position and how trade might actually feed back into economic growth in the UK. So finally, to summarise, economic growth is a key topic to understand. It will relate to many of the topics that you come across over the next half term in relation to Unit 4. And the examiner will expect you to understand what's been happening to economic growth in the UK and other economies since the recession, so since 2008 to 2014 and also into 2015 as well. So hopefully you found this summary useful. As I said, I'm going to do one per week,